Several weeks ago we started a series of Yesodot Kabbalah, the fundamentals of Kabbalah, and recently we've spoken about the various parts of the Neshama, Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Haya, Yachida, and we went on to discuss last week the topic of gilgulei Neshamot, reincarnation. And the essence of reincarnation is a tikkun. It's a second chance, third chance, a fourth chance, a fifth chance given to the Neshama, or more precisely, usually the Nefesh, to correct something that it did wrong in a previous lifetime, or to make up something that it left out, that it should have accomplished. After all, we all have a mission, a very specific mission, and we're given the tools to accomplish that mission, but because we get distracted and tempted, we don't always succeed. We fail to complete our mission. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives us a second chance, and if necessary more chances to come back and correct our wrongs. Therefore, gilgul in general terms is an opportunity to do it all over again. What I want to do now is discuss with you a more global type of tikkun. When I say global, I don't mean the entire world necessarily, but a tikkun that can occur in a reincarnation that does not only involve one individual, but it involves more people. Sometimes a gilgul is not for a specific tikkun to that individual, but it involves several people, a group of people. Some avel was done, some injustice was done in the previous lifetime that involved more than one person, and they all need to come back. It all needs to be repaired. If for it to be repaired properly, they all need to be present, so they all need to come back. And the best way to describe this is with a story that happened about 500 years ago with the Ari Kadosh in the city of Tzfat. There was a young man that had recently arrived from Spain, one of the Marano Jews. He was ignorant in his Jewish tradition because he was in hiding for so many years. There was no more Jewish education in Spain, at least not openly. So when he finally made it to Eretz Israel, all he knew was that he was Jewish, and he wanted to be part of the Jewish community. He was happy to be in Israel. In that city of Tzfat, there was a very big rabbi, a Rosh Yeshiva, who had a single daughter, I believe she was single daughter, who was having a hard time getting married. Every shidduch that was suggested, she had something to say about it. It was not for her. And she was getting older and everybody was concerned. In the meantime, her mother had passed away. And after her mother's passing, the mother comes to her in a dream and tells the daughter, don't accept any shidduch because your zivug, your soulmate, is that young man. His name is Abraham. The same dream came to the father, to this woman's husband, the Rosh Yeshiva. He had the same dream with his wife, that the zivug for this young girl, for his daughter, is Abraham. Now this Abraham, even though he was ignorant, he had managed to get a job at this yeshiva, this rabbi's yeshiva. And of course, as a result of working and helping out, he was going to eventually learn the basics, but he was still ignorant. And the rabbi would never have thought of this ignorant young man for his daughter. That's the dream he had, that's the dream his daughter had. And when they compared notes the following morning, they said, hey, we had the same dream. Could it really be? It was hard for the rabbi to accept it. The rabbi decided to go to the Ari, and the Ari tells him, Mazal Tov. That young man is the zivug for your daughter, B'Sha'at Tovah, Yat Hashem. The zivug should work out. And the Ari tells him, by the way, write a contract that if anything happens to your daughter, your future son-in-law will inherit her, including the house that you live in. The Ari said so, fine. They got married, and this young woman became pregnant, and right before she was about to deliver, sometime in the 8th, close to the 9th month, her father received some terrible news that his daughter had died, and obviously the baby died. And that was a very, very tragic piece of news for him. But then came even some more bad news. His son-in-law told his father-in-law, you need to leave the house, now everything belongs to me. And he couldn't understand what happened over here. He just lost his daughter, the son-in-law is running him out of the house. What's going on? So he went back to the Ari Kadosh and he says, can you please explain to me? I'm so distressed, I'm so upset, so broken. What happened here? And then he tells him a story. That once upon a time, there was a couple, husband and wife, who on the outside nobody could tell how they were getting along. It appeared fine, but this woman would always come to complain to the rabbi that her husband beats her. Abusive husband, there are such people out there. And the rabbi did not pay too much attention. He sent her off, gave her words of encouragement perhaps, until one time, after many complaints, she comes running to the rabbi that she was pregnant and her husband beat her on the stomach and killed the fetus. And as a result, of course, of her being beaten, she aborted. She had a miscarriage. And this time the rabbi became very upset. He called over the husband and says, "You're going to write a divorce to your wife. This is something she always wanted. She could never get." But this time the rabbi paid attention. He was sympathetic, made him give a divorce, and to pay her, to pay his wife so much money because of what he did to her. And that was the end of that story. The Ari HaKadosh turns to the rabbi and says, this trio, the rabbi, the husband, the wife, departed from the world after 120. They went up to the heavenly court, and upstairs they know the truth. That woman was always lying. Whenever she said her husband was abusing her, it was not true. She made up the story. She just wanted to get out of him, marry someone else. So she made up the story, and she herself beat her baby and caused the miscarriage, not her husband. So in the heavenly court that he says, they decided that all three have to come down to this world. The rabbi who made a mistake in issuing the divorce and making the husband pay so much money, the woman who killed her baby, and the baby. They all came down to this world. The rabbi turns to the Rosh Hashiva and says, "You are that rabbi in the previous gilgul, in the previous reincarnation. Your daughter was that woman who caused the miscarriage. And your son-in-law was her husband. Their tikkun was that this time around, your daughter should be killed by her fetus. That would be the tikkun for her killing her fetus in the previous lifetime. You, the Rosh Hashiva, who was the rabbi, who did not deliberate, but quickly made this man divorce her and pay her, since you made him pay what he did not owe, what he should not have paid, you ended up giving him your money by turning over the house to him. And this young man, who was the previous husband, who didn't deserve all that, who was completely innocent, received what was due to him." That he says, you see, according to Khan, everything is being repaired. In Avel, there's no corruption, everything is just. And this occurs through a gilgul. Through a gilgul, there's an opportunity to repair the harm, the damage that was caused in the previous lifetime. There's another brief story, I believe it's in the Zohar. Moshe Rabbeinu has a question. He tells Hashem, "Hodi'eni na derachecha." I'd like to understand your ways, why you do certain things. Madua tzadik v'ra rasha b'tovo. Why is it that the righteous prosper and the wicked, why is it that the righteous suffer and that the wicked prosper? Famous question. And Hashem tells Moshe that you can't understand everything. You don't live long enough to see what goes on in life. Because a person's record, what happens to an individual, neshama, may be related to several lifetimes. And we don't live long enough to see and to understand why certain things happen to people, but many times it is related to a previous life and the previous gilgul. So Hashem shows Moshe a picture. He puts him out in a field where he can see and they cannot see him. And he's observing how a man riding a horse passes by and drops a wallet full of cash. And goes on without noticing. After this horseman, a young little boy passes by the same path, notices this stash of money, picks it up and takes it. He's happy. After this young boy went by, a third individual comes by, a poor man who's had a very hard, long day. He's tired and wants to take a nap, and decides to take a nap exactly on that spot where the money, where the purse, where the wallet fell. As he's taking a nap, the horseman already noticed that he's missing his money. He goes back to where he figured he lost it, and he sees somebody there and he suspects him that he took his money. So he wakes him up, where's my money? He says, what money? What are you talking about? Who are you? He says, you took my money, give it to me. If you don't give it to me, I'll kill you. They have a whole argument, and at the end, the horseman kills this poor man. Moshe Rabbeinu is dumbfounded. He says, why? I saw the whole thing. It was the young boy who took the money, not the poor man. How can we let this thing happen? So Hashem says, well, all you saw was half the picture. You didn't see the whole picture. You don't know what happened in the previous lifetime. This young boy in the previous lifetime, his money was taken. By who? By this horseman. They both came back. This time, the young boy recovered his money, and that horseman lost the money. And what about the man that was killed? That poor man that was killed was the boy's uncle. He got so upset, and he killed the wrong man. Because he killed, he got killed. Even though it had nothing to do with this money right now, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu fixed everything in the next lifetime of the three. So all three came back to correct an avel, an injustice that was caused. These are some examples of gilgulim. In speaking about gilgulim, one needs to know that they don't necessarily happen immediately after a person dies. Even though last week I mentioned that it can happen almost immediately. Somebody in the family is pregnant, and the father, the uncle, as soon as the old body is buried, will have an opportunity to be reincarnated. That can almost happen immediately, but it doesn't always happen immediately. It can happen even after several years. And the reason for that is as follows. In the case of the trial, where there's more than one individual involved, well, we have to wait till all of them die. It could be that one dies 1 year, the other one dies 10 years from now. Only after they've all died does the HaKadosh who bring them all down, either at the same time or at different times. So a person does not always come back in a gilgul immediately. It could be after a number of years. But the more typical situation, or where one will not come back immediately, is where one has gone to Gan Eden, which I'll talk about later on. He's gone to what we call Gan Eden, paradise, and he's there for a number of years, and he wants to progress, he wants to advance even more, because there's different levels there too. And they tell him, you can't go anymore. Why not? Because to go beyond this point, you've had to have this mitzvah, this to your credit, and you don't have that. How do I get that? There's no chance of getting it there, coming back. So many times the gilgul is to allow a neshama to further advance herself, and that can happen after spending 7 years in Gan Eden. You want to go further, you want to go on, come back. So that's why gilgul can also occur after several years. We've spoken until now about the typical gilgul, which is a reincarnation in another human being, having another normal lifetime, born to parents, growing up, going to school, getting a job, getting married, having children. There is, however, a more, let's call it an inferior type of gilgul, lower class gilgul, that occurs in domain someach v'chai. There are 4 types of living, I don't know how you can call it, they're not living organisms, but they're living entities in this world. One is domain, an inanimate object like a rock. A higher level is the someach, the plants, because they grow, they have more life to them. Then you have the high, the animal, because it's living, not just growing. Then you have medaber, the human being, which is on the highest level. He also has the ability of speech. So you have domain, someach, high, and medaber. We've spoken about medaber, the typical human reincarnation. But it is possible for an individual to come back temporarily in a reincarnation in a rock, in a plant, in a leaf, or in an animal. These are usually temporary, and they have to do with a very specific tikkun for an avon, for a sin that they committed, that the tikkun for that avon is gilgul, temporary, not for 50 or 60 years, in one of these entities, one of these organisms. For example, there are certain sins that the tikkun for them is to be reincarnated in a dog. The dog is already alive, but the neshama, the nefesh, will enter that dog and be there for a little while. And there have been stories of dogs all of a sudden appearing out of nowhere during the Shiv'ah, running up to the bedroom of this young man that just died in a car accident, staying there for the minyan, and leaving right after the minyan was over. During the whole Shiv'ah, this dog would appear. Many stories like that. Cats, dogs, birds, and they may have a gilgul. But that is a temporary gilgul, and that is their tikkun. The difference between that gilgul and an ordinary gilgul, according to the Kabbalah, is that when one is in a human being, he doesn't even know he's reincarnated. He feels he's just having a life. When one is in a rock, a plant, or an animal, it feels it. This is not compatible. It knows that it's in a situation, in a very uncomfortable situation, in a situation where it would like to leave as soon as possible. And these gilgulim tend to be temporary, and usually what happens is that the neshama, the nefesh, after its tikkun in this gilgul, it goes to a higher gilgul. In other words, it can go from rock to a plant, from a plant to an animal, from an animal to a human being. Once it has completed its tikkun in the lower levels, it can go to the higher level, which is a normal gilgul, a normal lifetime, into a real human being. There are, however, situations where tzaddikim come in a gilgul too, not only in a human being, but in fish. A fish is one of the best types of gilgulim. It's a clean animal, and many times the gilgul, for it to have a real proper tikkun, it's not enough that it just comes into the animal. The animal is slaughtered and eaten by the poor, if it's meat, or by somebody who makes a blessing with the proper kavanot. That will be the tikkun. There are many stories of somebody who was in an ox. Nobody wanted to buy that ox. It was too wild, until the son had a dream with his father. I'm in that ox, you buy it. And for you, I will be very, very tame. Don't worry, you will be able to leave me in the street. This happened not too long ago in Europe. It was a tremendous Kiddush Hashem when nobody understood how this ox was being pulled to the slaughterhouse. The father's nefesh was in that ox. That was the tikkun. That ox to be slaughtered and the meat distributed to the poor. There is a tombstone in the old cemetery in Vienna in the shape of a fish. My grandfather was there, Allah Shalom, and he looked into the files of why a tombstone in the shape of a fish. And the story goes, many years ago, somebody bought the fish for Shabbat. And as soon as they started cutting up this carp, they began to say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. And I don't know if it was the woman or her husband, they got all fight and they went to the rabbi. What do we do? Can we eat it? Is it kosher? I mean, what's going on? And he said, probably there is a neshama in this fish. Just go ahead and bury it. I don't think they needed to bury it, because it could definitely be eaten for Shabbat, but that's what they did, and that is why there's a tombstone where there is, in the shape of a fish, to remind everybody the story behind this incident. More recently, about a year ago, there was in the city of New Square, not too far from New York City, another fish story, confirmed, real, of someone that the fish store manager or owner knew by recognizing the voice that who this individual was, and he said that this man was a good man, he was a tzaddik. And in the end, they couldn't figure out which fish it was, because the fish moved and jumped around and fell back to all the fish. But they made a lot of gefilte fish that Friday, so that was one of the fish. These stories occur from time to time. Things like that occur to strengthen our emunah, to remind us that these things exist. They don't occur every day, because that would interfere with our free will. But we know for a fact, this is part of our tradition, that is a form of tikkun. More recently, in the past few years, you may have heard of a phenomenon called autistic children, who have very limited capabilities, cannot speak, are physically handicapped, and they have been able to communicate with them. And through the communication, they have discovered that these children are very, very smart, that they know a lot of things, and many of them were even able to say why they're here in this world, and why they have come into this world in such a handicapped way, because it's a tikkun for them. And they're usually tzaddikim. They have done all the mitzvot, they just did one thing wrong.
Well, incredible images coming from NASA. You're looking at the clearest pictures ever taken of a massive solar explosion shooting into space. And joining me now to tell us exactly what this is, CNN's Chad Meyer. So it's not a solar flare. What exactly is this?
You know, it's just cool pictures, really. It's a piece of plasma that kind of got stuck between two magnetic fields. and then all of a sudden it couldn't be held by the magnetic fields anymore, and then exploded into space. Now, this didn't make an X-class player or anything like that, but just really cool stuff. There it is. There's the plasma dark, and all of a sudden shot off into space. You can see pictures like this all the time at NASA.gov. This is actually what our sun looks like right now. Please don't go out and look at it. Look at it on the website, because it's cooler here, because the Solar Dynamics Observatory takes these pictures. It's only been up there about 4 years. But the pictures that we see from the sun are phenomenal. You can't get anything like this looking at it, so please do not use NASA.gov to look at it. There's lots of great solar flares on that website.
But still requires a tikkun.
That's right. Childhood 101. Do not look at the sun, right? Didn't your mom tell you?
Women who do not have that same commandment of Torah, even though they can have the reward of supporting Torah and supporting their husbands, their cleansing and their tikkun can happen in Gehenom. So they usually don't come back as much as the men for small tikkunim. And I deliberately emphasized small tikkunim because they can come back for big tikkunim. As the story that I shared with you proves, if there's a big tikkun involved, the woman will come back too. Another situation where a woman comes back with gilgul is to accompany her husband, if she is a bat-zug, if she is a soulmate, and he wants the soulmate and he deserves that same soulmate from the previous lifetime. Hashem says, you know what, I'm going to send her down too, even though she doesn't need to, but she will accompany her husband. The third type of gilgul is not a real gilgul, but women can come be'ibur. We spoke about ibur last week. Ibur is a form of impregnating. You have an individual who's alive, and he received while he's alive a neshama that resides in him temporarily. That neshama can guide him or her. And many times you have a woman neshama in a man, and a man's neshama in a woman. This could be in ibur, and this could be in the real gilgul, that you have men who are in fact women in the previous lifetime. You have women who in fact have a man's neshama. And unfortunately, some women who cannot bear children, that is one of the reasons why they cannot bear children, because the neshama residing in that body is of a male. That's not the usual reason. That's not the usual explanation of why a woman cannot bear children, but that is just one of them. Now let's talk a little bit about goyim. We've spoken about gilgulim by Jews. And for the most part, a gilgul by a Jew is your typical gilgul, because it is a tikkun specifically customized for him. Goyim do not come back in gilgul for their personal tikkun. They don't have that. But we do know that goyim come back to gilgul. Why? Because they are part of a more global, of a bigger picture, of a tikkun that needs to happen. Not on a personal level, for a mitzvah that they're missing. Because they don't have 630 mitzvot. They don't therefore have all the averot. Therefore they don't have the necessity of this kind of a tikkun. But on a larger scale, a goy can and does come back to gilgul. The Zohar, for example, says, שעתיד הקדוש ברוך הוא להחיות את כל המלכים שהצרו לישראל. הקדוש ברוך הוא in the future will bring back in a reincarnation all the kings that caused the Jews many troubles. Sancheriv, Nebuchadnezzar, Titus. They will come back in a reincarnation, so they will pay for their crimes, because some of them may have died, after a nice life, a good life. And where is judgment? There is judgment upstairs too, but where is the judgment that we are going to see? The Zohar says there is a judgment that we are going to see. And that will happen before Mashiach comes. With a generation or two beforehand, there will be certain dictators, certain kings, certain leaders that may have the nefesh of a previous king, a dictator that caused us trouble, and they will pay for their crimes. Now we're holding by a ger. We've spoken about goyim in general terms, but what about a ger? A ger is a very unique individual, very special individual, but he comes from a non-Jewish family, and according to the Kabbalah, he therefore does not have, during his birth, or later on, during his lifetime, the ability to receive a ruach or neshama, even though perhaps a ruach, yes. But for the most part, all he has is a nefesh, the level of nefesh, not neshama. People are confused when we say goy does not have neshama, and they say, how could that be? They are confused because they mistake the terms neshama and nefesh. Everyone has a nefesh, because the nefesh is a spiritual part of the human being, as opposed to his physical body. Neshama is just a different level, something a little bit different. Same thing with the Ruach. So they don't have that level. It is not something that they need, and therefore they don't have it. If they were to need it, they would have it. But when a goy becomes a ger tzedek, and I say ger tzedek because there's all kinds of gerim out there who are not real. A ger tzedek is an authentic ger, who wants to join the Jewish people, who wants to embrace Judaism, wants to be mekabel ol malchut shamayim, the yoke of heaven. In order for that to happen, he needs assistance. He already has a divine spark in him. That is what brought him close to Judaism. But in order for him to fulfill the mitzvot, he receives what's called the nefesh hager. Nefesh hager is a special soul. According to the Kabbalah, according to the Ari, it's a fourth. If we exclude chaya and yachida, you have nefesh, ruach, and neshama. Nefesh hager will be a fourth one. This nefesh hager is a very, very unique garment, as the Kabbalah calls it. It's a garment. The reason why it's called a garment is because tzaddikim used this as a vehicle for them to come down to this world. Tzaddikim, whose ruach or neshama, not their nefesh, needs to come down. The nefesh is completely metukenet, completely repaired, or for some reason cannot bring down the ruach or the neshama. These tzaddikim, in order for the ruach and the neshama to come down and get their tikkun, they cannot do so unless they have some nefesh. A body cannot exist for the most part without some form of nefesh, being a bridge between it and the ruach. So even tzaddikim, the righteous, they use this nefesh hager, this type of nefesh, in order to enclose themselves to be able to come down to this world. A neshama tzaddik that even comes down the ibur, enclose itself, or can enclose itself with a nefesh hager. So nefesh hager is a very special type of nefesh that Hashem has created for certain purposes. Tzaddikim use it, and gerim receive it. And when they receive it, obviously, it brings them to the level of Am Yisrael. That is the meaning of nefesh hager. So it's not only something that the gerim receive, it's even something that the tzaddikim sometimes use in order to be able to come down into this world and fix their neshama. Since I'm already talking about it, I'll tell you how it's created. The way the Kabbalah describes this nefesh is that tzaddikim upstairs, at certain times, the men and the women, the neshamot, or the tzaddikim, are together. Even though there's no children up there, there are new neshamot or new lights created. And from the zibug of the tzaddikim, the nefesh hager is created. It's a special nefesh that is also used as a garment, to which tzaddikim themselves can sometimes come down into this world. And the ger, who of course has elevated himself to a tremendously high level, receives this beautiful gift, which even other Yehudim do not have. It's a special type of nefesh, and it's equivalent, if not higher, than the regular nefesh. Okay, we've reached the point of the Hayat HaMetim. We've spoken about gilgulim. Gilgulim are opportunities to repair, but what all that means is that a particular individual, in nefesh, would have come down to this world perhaps 15, 20, or 30 times. As long as he's repairing in every gilgul, then he can come back many times. We said last week that if you do not repair after 3 times, 3 strikes and you're out. So you have the original time plus 3 more. But if every single time you repair a little bit, you can come back many times, as long as it's necessary. So what will happen is the Hayat HaMetim, which will occur after Mashiach comes. It's part of the process, where the dead will be resurrected. You will have many bodies rising, but there's one nefesh. Even though the neshama can split itself, as we've described in the past, in many sparks, there's basically only one nefesh. So what will happen? So the Kabbalah says, it all depends which body fixed the most. It could be that many of the bodies did not do anything, or did very, very little. If they did nothing, or barely anything, they will be destroyed. They will not rise. And if they rise, maybe they will not remain. Another opinion, I believe, says that every body must have done something good. If that's the case, they will all remain. If they all remain, and let's assume they all did something good, what will happen to them? The nefesh will come back in the best body, perhaps the last one. But every one of the other bodies, the Zohar says, the Kabbalah, somewhere it is mentioned, yes, the Zohar says, each one of the other bodies will receive a new nefesh that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give them at the time of Kriyat HaMetim. Just like He will be giving them each one a new body. And by the way, when you receive your new body, you will feel like a 3-year-old child, full of energy. That's what the Zohar says. Even though everybody comes back in the same way they left. Whoever left at the age of 90 comes back as a 90-year-old man. Who was blind, he comes back blind. Who was limping, he comes back limping. Only in order for us to say, not to say, oh, this is someone else. In order for us to recognize our relatives, they'll have to come back in the exact same way we knew them. After a number of hours, days, or whatever, Hashem will heal everybody from their ailments. And everybody will have, if I remember correctly, the energy of a 3-year-old child. In other words, he will be young. So everybody comes back. The nefesh will come back in the best body, the one that did the most repair. And all the other bodies will receive a new nefesh that will give them existence. So they need something, they need some sort of nefesh to exist in this physical world. So assuming that they have reason to rise, to be resurrected, because they have something good to them, all the bodies will come back. And the way I've explained this in the past is that it will be like brothers and sisters. You can have many bodies belonging to the same neshama. They all will recognize each other, because each one had a different role. They have spoken different languages, they obviously look different, and lived at different times in history. And sometimes, believe it or not, you can have 1,000 years separating two gilgulim or more. People, individuals who belong to the same neshama. Another interesting area of Chiyat HaMetim is what happens to zivugim. The area of zivugim, of soulmates, is somewhat complex. There is not too much clarity, because even though it is possible for one to know if he married his zivug based on how he's getting along with her and how she's getting along with him, you can have somewhat of an idea. It does, however, happen that people marry more than once. And what happens when a person marries 2, 3, 4 times? Chiyat HaMetim, who's going to be his wife? Or if we speak to the woman, which husband is it going to be if she marries more than one man? So obviously, if there's a true zivug involved over here, the two zivugim go back to each other. That's simple. The two zivug goes back to each other. But what about the other woman? Now, the other woman, it's a little tricky. If they were married before to someone else, or not. If they were single, then it could be that they belong to this man too. If they were married to someone else, well, then it becomes even trickier. Well, if they were married to somebody else, well, who is it going to be? Who is the true zivug? How can you tell? Of course, when Mashiach comes, Hashem will assign everybody. But how does a woman know who she belonged to if she was married more than once? Well, the way it works is like this. According to the Kabbalah, if a woman remarries and her first husband, this is not a single girl who's marrying a man who's been married before. This is a married woman. She was married before marrying the second man. If her first husband was her real zivug, then many times the second husband will not be able to take it. The first husband's neshama is somewhat jealous and does not allow for the second husband to take over. Many times this happens, and therefore the second marriage does not succeed. If the first marriage was good, if the second marriage for some reason doesn't work out, the possibilities are that the first husband is not letting you. That's the way the Zohar explains it. He's throwing him out, throwing out this second man. The second man may either die or get divorced as a result of the first husband being the real zivug, interfering and not allowing it. However, many times it does occur that the first marriage is okay, but the second marriage is even better. When that happens, that could be an indicator that it was the second one that was the real zivug and not the first one. That is why people make a mistake when they read the Gemara about zivug rishon, zivug sheni. Zivug rishon implying the typical good zivug does not always have to come as number one. Zivug rishon sheni does not mean 1 and 2. Zivug rishon means the best one. The person can marry his real zivug, the zivug rishon, 20 years later, after they've met the first one, who was not the real zivug. So it's very difficult to know who it is, but there are some indicators. And the best indicator is you be the judge yourself. Which one was more successful relationship? For the man, it's also a little difficult. Because a man is allowed to have more than one, as I explained last week. So when Mashiach comes, of course, Hashem will put him together with the one that truly belongs to him. But what about the other ones? Where will they go? Well, if they had a real zivug of their own, they just didn't receive it for some reason, because the man, their real zivug, did not deserve it, at that time they will come back together. But it's very possible that those other women did not have somebody else as a zivug. Just this man. They'll have more than one. That's a possibility too. So the subject of zivugim is a very fascinating subject, but it's also a little bit complex, especially since we're dealing with reincarnations. And whenever you're dealing with gilgulei neshamot, it makes it more difficult, because the women don't always come back, right? What did we say before? They stay behind unless their husband deserves it, then they follow. And a man can have more than one. Even though today that's not allowed, but there are certain circumstances which allow for that. But Hayat HaMetim will fix everything up. We've spoken about gilgulim so far as being a form of tikkun. That's not the only tikkun. There's other types of tikkunim. The typical tikkun is a tikkun in olam hazeh, where the neshama, the nefesh, the ruach undergo a certain amount of suffering, whether it's financial, whether it's physically, problems. And that is a tikkun, we call that a kapara, an atonement for one's sins. And as I said last week, many times the atonement is not for something we did here, it's for something we did in a previous lifetime. And sometimes it's hard to know. When one sees problems after problems, like a wave, then it could be that they're telling him, Neshamayim, get your act together. Something that you're doing is not right. One after another. 1 week he gets a flat tire. The second week he has a problem, he has some root canal. The third week he has a lawsuit. The fourth week his wife kicks him out of the house. Right? The week after that, and one of his children gets into trouble. Something is going wrong here. Something is happening here. That could be because his behavior, his conduct right now is no good. Then there's something called Rosh Hashanah, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu decrees what will happen during this year, independent of a person's mazala, independent of a person's previous cheshbon in the previous reincarnation. So kaparat avonot can occur either for our conduct, our na'asim here, or because something we did in a previous lifetime. The common denominator is they're very powerful. Yisurim v'markim avonot, the Rabbi said us. They have the power to cleanse us from our sins. The Chafetz Chaim used to say, if people will only know how powerful Yisurim are, how much good they do to us when we come to the world to come, they would ask for double. But as one rabbi said, Lo midukshech v'lo meuktzeh. I'd rather not have your honey, not have your sting. The sting of, the bee, not the honey. I don't want the honey, and I don't want the sting. In other words, I don't want the pain, and I don't want the reward. Because some suffering is very difficult. But we have a tradition anyway that anyone that has a package, I say in English, a pekale, of some suffering, he can handle it. Hashem will only give us something that we can handle, not something we can't handle. Other than gilgul, other than yisurim, pain in this world, what else is there? Gehenom. What is Gehenom? It's not H-E-L-L. Purgatory. Purgatory is a place where you get a hot shower. So people think it's really a hot shower. It's not physical in any way. According to some of the Kabbalists, the biggest Gehenom is the busha, the shame that the neshama has upstairs when it sees how naked it is, no mitzvot, how stained its neshama is from all the averot, from all its sins. That is a tremendous busha, tremendous source of pain just from that. But there are different kinds of Gehenom, different kinds of purgatory, you can call them, where the neshama goes through a cleansing. It needs to. And it usually lasts for 11 months, up to 11 months. It lasts less. For Rashaim it lasts 12 months. And for those who are very, very wicked, it goes on forever. This is obviously a situation where Hashem sometimes says, you know what, you're not coming back. You need to get a small cleansing. We'll take care of it over here. But as we said before, this man studies a lot of Torah, but they won't let him go into Gehenom. So he needs to come back to gilgul. So depending on what was done, Gehenom is just another way of removing the stains and giving this neshama its tikkun that it needs. Yes? After the neshama finishes all its tikkunim, its gilgulim, it goes to tzror ha'chaim, its final resting place, the makom menuchata. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. So now we've reached the point of where we somehow understand how gilgul works, what the Surim are, Gehenom. What actually happens to the individual after he dies? Before he reaches the point of where they tell him you need a gilgul or you're going to Gehenom. What are the steps? The first step is the death itself, the mitah. Rabbi tells us mitah mechaperet. Death itself is somewhat painful. The neshama leaving the body, and that itself is a kapara. That's stage number one. Stage number two, a person sees, or actually hears, the neshama hears, shemachrizim et hamaasim shela, that the deeds that it did during this world are being announced as she's being led to the heavenly court. Number three, the kever, the neshama being buried. That is part of the din that he has to go through. And the Kabbalah goes into a little bit more detail what happens in that kever. There's an angel of death called Duma. There's all sorts of things that happen during that time. There's the most painful stage in the kever is called kibut kever, that those who are more tzaddikim are able to avoid. Kibut kever is to shake up this guf, so it separates itself completely from this world. Those who were very, very absorbed into this world, into the ta'avot, into all the desires of the bodily desires, have a harder time separating themselves from this. And that's why kibut kever is necessary, to remove, to shake up that body from the link it still has to this world. After kibut kever, there is the tolaim, the worms that take over and the body decomposes. That's also very painful to the neshama. Then there's the gehenom sometimes, or the kapakela, for those who are very wicked, who do not have peace. Kapakela is a slingshot, where the neshama has no menukah, being pursued by certain demons that give it no rest. So there are certain individuals who won't have menukah for many, many years, many generations, until they're finally led into gehenom, and after that perhaps come back in a gilgul. But that's the minority. Most Jews who have done mitzvot, who have been kind and honest and good, avoid many of these things, but still have to go through, the grave and all of that, which is somewhat painful. But at some point later on, they finally come to their resting place. When that happens, we don't know. It all depends on how many tikkunim it needs to go through. Right. I'm going to speak about that soon. The Chafetz Chaim, as I mentioned earlier, reminds us that all the Yisurim that we had in this world will benefit us, that in case the neshama did something terrible that it has to pay for, it has to cleanse itself from, they will subtract all that is coming to her because of all the Yisurim that it had. One of the most cutest, I don't like to call it cute, forms of Yisurim, not so cute, but I like to use this example anyway, I think it is cute, is that if somebody already had Gehenom in this world, he doesn't have Gehenom in the following world. Who had Gehenom in this world? Whoever had a bad wife. So if you have a miserable marriage, and it's not your fault, well, at least you won't have Gehenom in the world because you've had it in this world. Anyway, there was once an individual who became a widow. And as a result of him becoming a widow, he doesn't have a wife, and he has someone he needs to take care of, and a very, very difficult job. He came to complain to his rabbi, I can't take it anymore. I barely sleep. I can't manage. And he had a real difficult job. He used to work in a quarry. You know what a quarry is? Where you cut stones, rocks. Very hard job, long hours, difficult. And the rabbi didn't want to listen to him. He just encouraged him and said everything will be alright. And he was pushing the rabbi. One day he says, I'm not leaving until the rabbi blesses me, gives me berachah. The rabbi listens to him, puts him on his seat, sit over here, in my chair. And as soon as he sat down in the rabbi's chair, he sees a dream. He sees a dream. In the dream he sees himself in a chariot, in a wagon, and he sees many, many stones and rocks. And he asks the one who's leading the wagon, where are you taking all these wagons full of rocks? Because we're taking you to the heavenly court. And what are all these rocks? This is all the hard work that you put into this lifetime. He says, really? And he sees, Baruch Hashem, many wagons, and he's happy. After a while, those wagons of rocks stop. And he sees new wagons coming. He says, what are those wagons? Your sins. And he sees 1 wagon, 2 wagons, 3 wagons, 4. So many. He says, oh no, what's going to happen now? And he wakes up. He tells his rabbi, Rabbi, I'm going back to work. More rocks. I need more rocks. He realized that all this hard work, obviously, was going to be to his benefit. And it's better for him to continue this way. Otherwise, the person may have more wagons of sins than wagons of rocks in his city. What actually happens when a person dies? We spoke about the various stages. Right before the death, the rabbis tell us in the Kabbalah that the neshama and the ruach, if he had them, they leave him. 30 days or so before a person dies, he already feels that he's going. We're talking about somebody that does not die all of a sudden. Because he's losing parts of his neshama and ruach, he can already tell, I'm leaving. And the thing that leaves him towards the end is the tzelem. The tzelem is like an image, something on him that just leaves him. And even the birds on all the animals can tell on him this man is leaving this world once the tzelem has left him. It's just different parts of him that leave him at different times, all prior to his death. Maybe a big tzaddik to see that. So after all of this has left him, he's able to see his relatives coming to greet him. All of a sudden, on his bed, in the hospital at home, he sees his father, his mother, his grandparents, all those that he knew in his lifetime. They appear exactly the way they appeared in their lives, and they're either happy or sad, depending on how this man conducted himself. This man conducted himself well, they're happy, greet him, and they take him. In other words, they're going to take him and accompany him to his final resting place. If this man did not behave himself, then they are sad, and he's sad when he sees that they are sad. Right. Right after he sees them, he actually gets a glimpse of the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death. Something we may not have seen a whole lifetime. At that moment, the rabbis tell us that the eyes are given permission to see that which they were not able to see a whole lifetime. After that, at the very, very last moment, depending on the level of this individual, he actually sees the Shekhinah. And from that, he departs from this world. After the individual is buried, the nefesh goes back and forth between the cemetery and the home for the 7 days of the Shiv'ah. During the first year, the nefesh is on the grave. If he had a ruach, the ruach is in Gan Eden Atachton, in the lower Gan Eden, which is in this world, which is a different kind of Gan Eden. And there is a Gan Eden Elyon, where the neshama is, in the upper world, where there is yeshivot shel mala, where they learn. Where in the Gan Eden Atachton, it's a much more of it's a different kind of an experience. But it's also Gan Eden. After the year, the nefesh leaves the grave, and only a portion of the nefesh called the Havla de Garmi remains. Havla is like the hevel of the bones. A bit of the nefesh remains all the time on that spot. And that is how they can, some say that is how seances are done, by calling the little bit of portion of the nefesh that remains there, or whatever portion is accessible. After the nefesh has left and joined the ruach, nevertheless on the yard side, they are joined together at the grave. But do not go on Rosh Chodesh or on Shabbat, because you won't find them there. During those times, the nefesh is not there. They go to the Yeshiva Shel Mala, they go to Gan Eden, wherever they need to be. Yard sides are very special because every yard side it is possible for neshama to have an aliyah, for it to ascend further, up to a certain point, beyond that which it can no longer go. On your side, it is able to ascend, especially if it left behind children who are behaving themselves properly. And what helps the neshama the most, since it can no longer do anything for itself, is tzedakah, learning Mishnayot, and the Kaddish. These are very, very important. And if nobody says Kaddish because they're only girls, hire someone to say the Kaddish. All of this helps tremendously by giving a boost to the neshama, giving it the aliyah that it needs, that it could acquire at every yard site. Also, to a certain extent, grandchildren can also help. Okay, I want to finish with the last point. Neshamot can be very, very special. Even though they're coming down to this world, they can be neshamot vuhot. One cannot know how big of a neshama he has, except for one way. If during the night he has very, very clear, crystal clear dreams, and in those dreams he sees certain things, it is possible that what he has is not just a plain nefesh, but a ruach too. Because anybody that is endowed with a ruach can see a lot more, with more clarity than somebody that just has a nefesh. So even though we may not know, but it's very possible that simple people from simple families and simple parents may have really neshamot gvorot, and they have to be very careful not to stain it. And even though it's difficult for one to know whether he has a neshama gvora or not, in a dream he may be able to know. In Hashemayim, they will show him different things according to one's level. The level of the dream also depends on one's ma'asim, one's deeds, and we'll talk about it 2 weeks from now. We'll talk a little bit about dreams, what dreams mean. What kind of a neshama comes down into this world, the parents many times determine, depending on what their thoughts were, what their kavanot were, their conduct during the time that they were intimately together. They can determine which neshama will come down. A good neshama, a neshama that requires many tikkunim, or one that is righteous neshama. You can have what's called a guf ahur or a guf naki. The body is a clean body, but the neshama is no good. Or the body is a dirty body, and the neshama is good. In other words, either a dirty body and a good neshama, a clean body and a bad neshama. It all depends on the kavanot, the conduct of the parents, what they thought about, if they were only thinking about themselves, how they prepared themselves, did they do it bikdusha, in a holy way or not. That can determine which neshama will come down into that boy or girl. And last but not least, even though a person may have done many sins, he does not have to wait for Gehenom. He does not have to wait for disease or Yisurim. There are tikkunim that the Kabbalah describes that people can do to redeem the soul. There's tzedakot, there's fasting, and according to the Kabbalah, in our generation, we don't really need to resort to too much fasting because that weakens our body. We're not up to it like in previous generations. But there are prayers, there are tzedakot, there are ma'asim and mitzvot that one who commits himself to do them for the rest of his life, through them he will be able to achieve his tikkun in Olam Hazeh. Okay, B'ezrat Hashem, next week we'll continue with the series, and we'll talk about the Aleph Bet. The 22 letters of the alphabet and how they form different words and what the meaning of each letter is. They have great significance. And the following week will be the last week of this series, where we'll talk about the spectrum of colors, meditation, and a few other ideas, perhaps dreams, all that which is related to the Kabbalah. Then I'll be away for 2 weeks. I'll be with the Kabbalah. Right, that's correct. Yes. No, Riyat HaMetim will be for all, especially Hasidei Umot Olam, the righteous of the nations. But even some of the wicked will rise to be judged. After they will be judged, they will not remain. But there's a group of blacklists that will not even rise. But initially, everybody rises, or many will rise. But everybody will be judged. Some will remain to the world to come, including the righteous of the nations, Hasidei Umot Olam, and some will not remain.
What about the role of the
We discussed that when I spoke about Riyat HaMetim, a whole different lecture. The 13 Ikarei Emunah, 13 principles of Judaism, that we believe in the resurrection and how that will come about. It's one of the stages of Mashiach. It occurs a number of years after Mashiach has come. The Jews in Eretz Israel will rise first. The Tzadikim will rise first. Those who are in Chutz La'aretz will also come, but they come through underground tunnels. But they receive the neshama in Eretz Israel. So this will happen over a number of years. I think the Zohar says 40. At the end, everybody will rise, and some to be judged and die back, and some to remain to Olam Haba. So B'ezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week.